Should the Braves be worried about Pete Alonso returning to the Mets for 2025? That and more in today's Notebook edition of Braves Today. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, February 7th. This is your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And now that we've done our position player preview week, we've talked about the outfielders, talked about the infielders, both corner and middle, talked about the catchers. Pitchers are coming next week. But before that, I want to close the week while wrapping up the notebook, right? What did we learn this week? New developments. So we're going to talk about all of the different prospect rankings that came out and what I created to help you make sense of them. We're going to talk about any potential adds to the roster, when that might be and what position they might target, and some guys that would make a lot of sense. But first, I was asked to take some time in a mailbag, and this is the closest thing we have to one, to talk about Pete Alonso returning to the New York Mets. He signed a 2-year deal, and really, despite the high dollar amounts involved in this whole thing, Pete's kind of a loser of free agency here, right? He turned down a 7-year extension going into during the 2023 season, so it would have bought out 24. Turned out a 7-year deal. He reportedly turned down a 3-year deal earlier in free agency because he wanted more money up front. And the deal he got, 2 years, $54 million, isn't a bad deal on its face, right? He gets a $10 million signing bonus, $20 million salary this year, and a player option for 2026 at $24 million. And the expectation is Pete's going to play this year and then opt out and go to free agency, which it's funny because this year he was in that same free agency class as Juan Soto. So everything was waiting on that free agency to resolve. Next year, if Pete goes to free agency, he's going to be in the same free agent class as Kyle Tucker and Vlad Guerrero. 2 hitters who are arguably better than him, including one that is at his same position. But that's not the super important thing to Braves fans, right? Braves fans were asking about what this means for Atlanta, right? What this means for Atlanta's chances of winning the division and making it back to the World Series. And the good news is, as of Thursday night, when I finished the rundown here, Atlanta was still projected to be one of the best teams in baseball, even with the Mets coming in, right? PECOTA, that's the baseball prospectus projections of both players and teams. It's funny, it's named for, or it's not named, it's what's called a backronym, right? It's an acronym you made to tie into a thing. It's a backronym for former Major Leaguer Bill PECOTA, but it stands for Player Empirical Comparison and Optimization Test Algorithm. It was developed in 2003 by Nate Silver, who went on to do incredibly accurate modeling for elections, right? And Baseball Prospectus still has those to this day. And when they came out, they said Atlanta was projected to be the second best record in all of baseball, okay? As you can expect, the Los Angeles Dodgers came out with 104-58, which is just absurd, right? But number 2 in baseball wasn't the Yankees, wasn't the Mets even after Pete, wasn't the Phillies, it was the Braves. 92-70. It's important to understand that these projection systems are a little bit conservative, right? They have one team projected over 100 wins. Now, sometimes that happens in real life. Last year, I don't think anybody had 100 wins last year. The year before, there's been a couple teams in the past who did it in the same season. I remember one year the Dodgers and Giants were both just ridiculously good, and the Dodgers actually, I think, lost the division to the Giants and were a wild card or something like that. Point is, They have Atlanta projected as the second best record in baseball. It's funny, I checked a lot of sports books on Thursday night. A lot of the sports books still have Atlanta as the favorite to win the division. They think Atlanta is more likely to win the East than the Phillies are, than the Mets are. Most of the movement that I noticed seemed to be behind Atlanta, right? It feels like a lot of the movement was with Soto and Pete and everybody else to the Mets. They were moving the Mets up from third to second and moving the Phillies down from second to third. And of course, that's going to be a giant talking point. Philly's going to talk about all of this disrespect that they're getting. They're going to manufacture some grievance so that they can remember that they have to actually do their jobs and play baseball. That's how they work, is they manufacture motivation through grievance, right? They talked about Snit disrespecting them by talking about how they got eliminated 2 straight years and the postseason is difficult and all of that. He didn't bend the knee enough to Philly when he said that the postseason's tough and they didn't have a good series and they got eliminated or whatever. But when you look at PECOTA and some of these projections, yes, Atlanta is projected to win the division over New York and Philly, but it's still really close. They have Philly at 87 and 75. They have New York at 91 and 71. And again, they have Atlanta at 92 and 70. So it's very close. Atlanta's at 47% odds to win the division, 34% for the Mets, 17% for Philly. I want to see the world in which Washington cashes that 0.5% chance to win the division. I want to see how that works out. But Atlanta has the second best odds of making the postseason in all of baseball, 89.4%, right? They have the second best odds of winning the World Series, according to PECOTA, of any team in baseball at 8.2%. I know that this has been a frustrating offseason for Braves fans. This is still a very good roster. And yes, there are questions about health or regression or whatever. Every team has those questions. And it's important for us to remember this is still a World Series contending team as currently constructed. I do find it really interesting how when you look at some of the inputs that go into this record, this 92 and 70 record from PECOTA, there's a lot of really interesting kind of, not caveats here, but some clustering of a lot of this, right? Atlanta's projected for the fourth lowest runs allowed in baseball at 662. Everybody else in the division is over 700, right? New York, Philly, over 700. Miami's almost 800. So it shows the Braves pitching staff is expected to be a strength this year. The defense is going to contribute to that as well. And that's even with all of the regression questions for the Braves pitching staff, they're still projected to be a strength. But they also have their work cut out for them because Atlanta's projected to be fifth highest in runs scored at 760, which that's a plus 98 run differential, which is very healthy. But the other 4 teams that are ahead of them in runs scored are all in the National League. The Dodgers, as you can expect, lead baseball in the projection for runs scored with 833. Arizona's at 778, the Arizona Diamondbacks. Still, in my mind, working out how that's supposed to work, how that's going to happen, but I'm just going to stick with the... PECOTA's been pretty good from year over year, unless massive injuries like we had last year influence that. But the other 2, Philly and the Mets, are projected for more runs than Atlanta. The Mets at 802, second highest total in baseball, and Philly at 765. 2 things can be true at once, okay? Atlanta has a very good roster as currently constructed, and according to this and many other projection systems and Vegas, one of the best rosters in baseball. On the other hand, 2 of the better teams in baseball and in the National League are in your division with New York and Philadelphia. At the end of the day, I feel comfortable that all three of these teams are, barring catastrophic injury and collapse, all three of these teams are going to be in the postseason. And we've seen it doesn't matter where you are slotted in the postseason. Atlanta won the division in 23, didn't help them in the postseason. They were a wild card in 21, I think. Nope, I'm dumb. Obviously, I'm sorry. They won the division in 21, but they had to play they had to go through all the different rounds. They had to beat the Brewers, Dodgers, and all that. Anyway, but the point is, they made the World Series and won the World Series. They were a wild card in 24, and they were out after the first round. The Mets didn't win the division last year. They made the NLCS. The Phillies were a wild card. They made the NLCS. It doesn't matter, really, at the end of the day, where you're seated in the postseason, as long as you get in the postseason. And again, Atlanta's in the driver's seat to win the division, but even if they don't win the division, and it's understandable if they do, they are one of the best teams in baseball. They are going to, barring catastrophic injury, I'd argue worse than last year, because they still made the postseason last year. They're going to be in the postseason. And because of that, they will have a chance to win the World Series because they'll be in the dance in October. In just a second, let's talk about pitchers and catchers reporting next week, what ads might still be left for this roster, and when to expect to see them. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. The big game is here. Use the link in our episode description, promo code BRAVES, to get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash with your first deposit. I've talked about this ad nauseum now. I love how this works. You go and you make a lineup of players and player projections. You're choosing higher or lower on their expected stats, and you can win big. Depending on how you structure your lineup, how many players, if you pick higher or lower, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. For the big game this weekend, they have a promo. Travis Kelce, tight end for the Chiefs, Taylor Swift's boyfriend, as my wife calls him. His projection for receiving yards has gone from 64.5 to 0.5. You can take higher on 0.5. It is, in essence, a free win in your lineup. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at Saquon Barkley higher than 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. Kareem Hunt, if you feel like it's going to be a lot of ground game. On the other side, Kareem Hunt also has a projection of 0.5 rush and receiving touchdowns. Okay? You can look at Jalen Hurts passing yards higher or lower than 213.5. There's a lot of really great stuff. I'm going to post the graphic of my lineup on social media and on YouTube in the community tab before the game I'm going to do it on Sunday morning. Let me know if you're tailing. If we will shout you out on the pod, especially if we win. You're not going to hear the end of it if we win. Send me your lineups if you think you can make a winning lineup, and we will share it with everybody. Again, Underdog Fantasy, links in the episode description, promo code BRAVES. New customers get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Try Underdog Fantasy today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about emptying the notebook here before spring training starts, or before pitchers and catchers report, right? And there's been a lot of questions about, are the Braves done adding? And for the record, no, I absolutely do not think that they're done adding, right? A kind of touched on this in some of these public comments. He said that this could run into early, February, right? He said that this could run into February and into spring. It did last year. They added Adam Duvall in spring training. They added Jesse Chavez in spring training. That absolutely could happen again this year. And there's a really significant reason why you may not see an acquisition until after pitchers and catchers report next Wednesday. And it's because once pitchers and catchers have reported, you have the ability to move somebody to the 60-day IL. Okay? The 40-man roster is full right now. So unless you bring in a guy on a minor league deal, you have to be willing to give up a depth piece to add a player right now. But once pitchers and catchers have reported, if you need to make a roster move and add someone to your roster, a corresponding move can be adding somebody to the 60-day IL. Now, it's not going to be Ronald Acuna Jr., it's not going to be Spencer Strider. The way that the 60-day IL works, it's not 60 days from when you add them in spring training. It's 60 days from opening day. It works differently now than it does in the season. In the season, when you move them to the 60-day IL, either straight to it or from the 15 to the 60, it starts counting those 60 days when they first went on the injured list. In spring, it's different. It starts counting the 60 days on opening day. So if you're expecting Ronald Acuna Jr. back before the end of May, and again, I reported on this pod and on social media, his personal goal is to be back for that Dodgers series in Truist in early May 2nd. Spencer Strider is expecting to be back before 2 months into the season. You're not going to put them on the 60-day IL because you couldn't get them back until late May. Joe Jimenez, however, the conversation, the time frame that's been relayed to us in different media availabilities is he was told 9 to 12 months from when the surgery happened in November, right? So trade deadline, something like that. You can add Joe Jimenez to the 60-day IL, and it doesn't matter that he's not eligible to be activated until late May because he wasn't going to come back in late May anyway. So that can buy you a roster spot. And I put this on Twitter because some people were asking questions, and I got clowned a little bit by some people saying, oh no, there's no way the Braves could afford to lose a Luke Williams or an Amos Willingham to add a guy. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't do it, right? But you're in a situation of how many difference makers are truly out there where it's worth making the move now and giving up a depth piece versus waiting 5 more days, right? What are I imagine that the market on a lot of these relievers are going to pick up the start of next week when pitchers and catchers start reporting because they can make 60-day IL spots. So I mentioned Kenley Jansen last week. I actually, doing some more digging, don't think that Kenley Jansen's going to end up being with the Braves simply because he reportedly wants to continue being a closer so that he can push for some of the records that he has coming, right? He is 31 saves away from Lee Smith for 3rd all-time in saves, and he's sitting on 447 right now, so he's 53 away from 500 saves for his career. So I don't think Atlanta is going to bring him in to be a setup man this year. I don't think he's going to want to sign with Atlanta to be a setup man this year because of that reason. But I do think that there are 2 interesting options I've been asked about, probably the best relievers out there outside of Kenley Jansen, and that's David Robertson and Kyle Finnegan, okay? Pros and cons on both of these guys. Robertson, 39 years old. He pitched for $11.5 million last year, actually turned down a $7 million option. It was a mutual option. He turned down his end. Mutual options are so dumb. They almost never get picked up. Got paid a $1.5 million buyout. But 3-4 with a 3 ERA in a career-high 72 innings for the Texas Rangers. 99 strikeouts, 27 walks. He is cutter, curveball, slider, right? It's a 93-mile-an-hour cutter, knuckle curves in the low 80s, sliders also in the low 80s. All of them have outlier traits. They're all unique pitches based on your typical cutter, your typical knuckle curve, your typical slider from a movement perspective. So that's a thing that you like. There is a lot of red on his StatCast. So obviously a thing that is very promising there. If there's a criticism, he doesn't generate a ton of chase, and he does walk like 9% of batters, but He doesn't give up a lot of ground ball, or he doesn't give up a lot of fly balls, doesn't give up a lot of barrels, one of the best strikeout rates in baseball, lots of whiffs. Dudes just aren't touching his stuff. And he wasn't super lucky last year. ERA of 3, expected ERA was within 20 points of that, 3.19. He is also a Southern boy, was born in Birmingham, went to high school and college in Tuscaloosa. I'm an Auburn guy. I refuse to say the name of that school, but the point is, he is a Southern boy, so that always does. 39 years old, it doesn't really matter, but he is the demographic. He's my age. He is the demographic that grew up watching the Braves, and that may influence things a little bit or be a tiebreaker for you. Again, the downside here is he's 39 years old. He just had a career high in innings, right? The other guy that I've been asked a lot about is Kyle Finnegan. 3-8 with a 3.68 ERA in 63 and change innings for Washington last year, was making $5.1 million last year. They non-tendered him this offseason, which is a little surprising, little concerning, whatever. Four-seamer comes in at 97. He's got a splitter. He's got a slider. Rarely uses the slider. It's a fastball splitter kind of thing. He gets hit really hard, okay? His hard hit rate, 48.1%, second percentile in baseball. Now, because his ground ball rate is good, 73rd percentile at 46.5%, he doesn't give up a ton of barrels and things like that. He's not getting nearly as much chase or whiff as some other guys, but like it's working out here, right? The splitter is his best pitch. And again, he's pairing it with a four-seamer. It actually technically, despite the great velocity of 97, it graded out negatively from a run value perspective because it's got a lot of prototypical or like the movement is where you think it would be, and he throws it 4 strikes a lot. It lives in the zone. And again, we've discussed this when talking about Hurst and Waldrop. For a splitter to be effective, you have to pound the zone with your primary pitches because the splitter is inherently a chase pitch that's going to drop out of the zone. He lands it a lot he's really good about landing it for a strike. He's right there on the black at the bottom of the zone. But he pounds the zone with his fastball, and so because of that, he does get hit hard sometimes and does give up runs. Both these guys, I think, are probably your 2 best remaining relievers. I don't think either one of them is worth grabbing ahead of time if you can help it. There's no reason, I think, to get one of these guys and give up a random depth piece unless you have to do it to keep them from signing somewhere else, right? So I expect Atlanta to add a reliever. I expect it to be probably after pitchers and catchers report. Maybe they add a starter. Lefty Andrew Heaney feels like he'd be a good fit just to come eat some innings if they want more certainty in the rotation behind what they have. But again, I don't think Heaney moves the needle for you as far as a postseason starter kind of guy goes. In just a minute, I made something new to help Braves fans who care about prospects make more sense out of this farm system. And I want to talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby here, emptying the notebook for you on a Friday. Let's talk about the Atlanta Braves Prospect Composite, okay? If you're a college football fan, you know that when it comes to recruiting rankings, there's a ton of options, right? On3, Rivals, ESPN, 247, whatever. They all have their own rankings. They're all different, right? Same thing with prospects. There's even more options, I'd argue, for prospects. So I did something. By the time this show comes out, the article will be published. The newsletter will be published on the Braves Today Substack, bravestoday.com. It's going to be free to read. We're not paywalling this. And this is, I have collected 10 different prospect rankings. Now, caveat, 2 of these aren't out yet. MLB Pipeline's not out yet. Fangraphs isn't out yet. But we've collected 10 different prospect rankings, and I've made what I'm calling the Braves Prospect Composite. And this is all of these rankings in one place, okay? You can see all of these prospects, their ages, their positions, where each prospect list has them on the list. Some of these are paywalled, so we're not giving you scouting reports and tool grades and all that. But Like, for instance, you can see when you look at this, you can see there's a very clear tier 1 when you go through these 10 different prospect lists. Drake Baldwin, AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, Cam Caminiti, Nacho Alvarez, Owen Murphy, J.R. Ritchie. It is a very clear 1 through top tier of prospects in the system. Those are your 7 top prospects. In just about, not always, but just about every ranking, those guys are in your top 7. There's a couple exceptions. Hurston Waldrop is as high as 2, but he has a 9 and a 10, right? J.R. Ritchie has a 4. He also has a couple 7s and a 6 and an 8, right? There's a couple of exceptions here, but like Drake Baldwin, on the 7 that we have available right now, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, and 3. It's the idea here is you can look at this and see the general range any given Braves prospect should be. I also went in here and did a color coding system for this, where the higher the ranking, it is green. As it moves down the range, it becomes farther towards red. So there'll be like, Drake Baldwin is very green all the way across. But you get to a guy like John Gill, who ends up being one of the more divisive prospects. His high is 12 from Baseball America. His low is 26. Garrett Bowman, high of 6 from Baseball Prospectus, low of 20 from Battery Power. You can see where the consensus is there and where there's a lot of disagreement about a player's potential. Okay, real quick, the 10 things that we used for this, I separated them into 3 tiers. So tier 1, Baseball America, MLB Pipeline, which is not out yet, Baseball Prospectus, and Fangraphs, which is not out yet. Anybody who's a prospect fan, you've heard of these 4 sites. These are, Baseball America is the gold standard to this. MLB Pipeline is the league's own prospect coverage. Baseball Prospectus and Fangraphs also do really good work. This is tier 1, okay? These are the very first ones on the sheet from left to right. These are big. There's a vertical black line separating this next group of 3 different rankings, and it's The Athletic, it's ESPN, and it's Dynasty Dugout with friend of the show, Chris Clegg. The reason that these 3 are in second tier, there's one factor that puts these into a second tier, okay? ESPN is Kylie McDaniel, who, fun fact, used to work for the Braves. I talked about that book, Future Value. Kylie was one of the authors of Future Value, along with Eric Longenhagen from Fangraphs. Kylie McDaniel of ESPN, Keith Law of The Athletic. They're in tier 2 because their lists only go 20 prospects deep, okay? The other sites, Prospectus, Pipeline, Baseball America, Fangraphs, whatever, they all go 30. So I put these into tier 2 because they don't go as deep as the other ones. Dynasty Dugout, I love Chris. I think Chris's stuff is as good as any of these other sites. I'd put Chris's stuff up against MLB Pipeline any day, Fangraphs, Prospectus, whatever. Chris's rankings are technically for fantasy baseball. So I put him into that second tier just so that you're aware that is the reason I did that before you go look at these as well, right? His rankings, they still go pretty closely with what a lot of other people have, but it's technically a tad bit different because you're looking at the fantasy impact of these players versus real life baseball, right? And then tier 3 are the non-journalists that still do really good work, right? Prospects 1500. I know a lot of the people over there. I've worked on some of their prospect lists before. Really good people. Battery Power, the SB Nation site. They have a huge minor league team. They do really good work on their lists. Outfield Fly Rule is a newer independent site covering the Braves farm system exclusively. Their rankings are on here as well. So the idea of this, again, is to give you an idea of where a prospect is in the hierarchy of Braves prospects. And then where there's disagreement on certain guys, right? Luis Guanipa is a great example of this. ESPN has him as the fourth best prospect in this system. Baseball America, an outfield fly rule, have him at 22. Okay? He had a rough year last year when he got to full season ball. Okay, fine. Kylie McDaniel's a believer at ESPN. Baseball America's not. Okay? Herrick Hernandez, last year's draftee, who I've talked about as a potential breakout draft pick. He's as high as 13 on Baseball Prospectus. SB Nation, Battery Power, has him as an honorable mention. He's outside their top 30. You can see here are the guys that we either don't have a lot of info on, like a Guanipa, like a Hernandez, or guys that have a lot of variance in their projection, right? Hurston Waldrop is a great example of a guy, again, as high as 2 from Prospects 1500, as low as 10 from Baseball Prospectus, because the question is he a starter? Is he a back-end reliever? That's where the variance comes in. Relievers are inherently not as valuable as starters. That's also why Atlanta keeps trying to convert relievers to starting, because if you can make a guy a starter on a reliever cost, that is additional value, and that's how you can build an above-average team like Atlanta has that's one of the best in baseball, even without significant offseason ads. This has been Braves Today for Friday, February 7th. You're listening on audio. Do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop that next episode, and maybe also leave us a 5-star review. I really like those. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.